honest, he asked, she was, Slade, did you even take a bath once? He goes, well, we swam in the lake every day. That's boys for you. You know, I'm here to talk to you about our country and what we need to do to get back on the right path. Before I do want to talk to you just a little bit about news of the day. If you're like me, you've probably been watching the news and reading about this latest scandal involving Hillary Clinton and her emails. You know, first of all, so the State Department is now releasing emails that she had not released before. But they only had the emails she chose to give them. She didn't edit, she didn't delete. But it gets worse than that. Everybody's focused on the lack of transparency and dishonesty. That's par for the course for the Clintons. What is new here, though, is how they have jeopardized national security. So she's got on her private server classified information, national security information, and here's what galls me. The Chinese and the Russians are more likely to see her emails than the American people. Yeah. The reality is we'll be the last superpower to see it. If we really want the emails, we should call those hackers up and see if they'll share it with us. And that's why I'm here to tell you, it is not optional that we win in 2016. And it's not for the Republican Party, and it's not even for the state of Iowa, and it's not even for the state of Louisiana. It is not optional because our entire country is what's at stake. Let me explain to you what I mean by that. You know, I was thinking long and hard about all of the damage that President Obama has done to our country. $18 trillion of debt. Obamacare between you and your doctors. An EPA that's trying to strangle our economy. A foreign policy that makes no sense to me. So today we're normalizing relations with Cuba. We refuse to stand with Israel. We refuse to stop Iran from becoming a nuclear power. We've got a president who's apologizing for America everywhere he goes. All of that, or a lot of that, can be undone. Maybe the worst thing, most dangerous thing this president is doing is trying to change the definition of America. Trying to change the definition of the American dream. What do I mean by that? Every time he speaks, when you look at his policies, it's all about redistribution. It's all about division. It's all about dividing us from each other. He and Hillary Clinton have got us on the path towards socialism. Let's be honest, they're trying to turn the American dream into the European nightmare. And I want to start by telling you why the American dream is so important to me. Now, the reality is my parents, they have lived the American dream. My parents, they came to this country over 40 years ago. My dad's one of 9 kids, the only one that got past the 5th grade. Grew up in a house without electricity, without running water. First time they ever got on a plane was when they were coming to America. I try to tell my kids there was no internet, they couldn't Google it. Yet they knew in their bones they were coming to an idea as much as they were coming to a place. By the way, they came legally when they came. And I know you're not supposed to say this, but let me just say this. For anybody that wants to come to America, they should come here legally, they should learn English, they should adopt our values, and they should roll up their sleeves and get ready to work. You know, it's not politically correct to say that, but we shouldn't be giving people freedoms to come here and undermine the same freedoms we give to everybody. Now, the left will tell you that's arrogant. I think it's just common sense to say, if you don't want to be an American, don't come here. I'm going back to my parents. They got here. My mom was a student at LSU. My dad had come to work, didn't know anybody. Opened up the yellow pages, started calling company after company looking for a job. Finally wore down a guy from the railroad company who said you could start Monday morning. I love what my dad tells his new boss. He tells him that's great. He tells him, now look, I don't have a car. I don't have a driver's license. You're going to have to pick me up on the way to work. I know we got a young one over here. I wouldn't recommend that in your first job interview. Don't say that. It's like one of the top 10 things you should never say when you're looking for a job. The guy was so taken by his enthusiasm to work, he picked up my dad. 6 months later, I was born. I was what you would politely call a pre-existing condition. That's okay, the Democrats call me worse. I'm used to it. All that meant was my parents' insurance didn't cover me. But I love what my dad did next. No government forms, no bureaucracy, no paperwork. My dad simply went to the doctor. And he offered to send him a check every month until he paid that bill in full. That's just what you did. You know, I asked my dad, I said, that was a simpler time. Would that really work today? I mean, think about it. How do you pay for a baby on layaway? I mean, if you skip a payment, do they take the baby back? He assures me, he goes, look, you were such a bad little baby. We would have sent you back if that was an option. No, but I heard the right answer to that question. That absolutely would work today. And that's what this election is about. This election is about saying America is not about government dependence. America is not about $18 trillion of debt. America, if we're not careful, America will be the next Greece. You look at Puerto Rico, you look at Greece, and here's the problem. There'll be nobody to bail us out. We're the light of freedom in a very dangerous world. Now, our president doesn't believe in American exceptionalism, but I do. And that's why this election is so important. Now, look, I know there are a lot of people running for president. We got a lot of talkers, not doers. If talk was good enough, we'd be on Easy Street. We got a great talker in the White House today. First-term senator, never run anything. He needed on-the-job training. We can't afford that again. Now, every Republican will tell you, hey, look, I'm going to get rid of Common Core. I'm going to do school choice. I'm going to cut my budget. We're not just talking about those things. We have done those things in Louisiana. We did cut our budget 26%. We did cut over 30,000 state government positions. We did statewide school choice. We privatized our charity hospital system. We're a top 10 state for private sector job creation. More states working, living in Louisiana than ever before. But there's another side to that story. When you do things like that, the government crowd, they'll complain. We've not raised taxes once. We had the largest income tax cut in our state's history. And this is what they'll tell you about me. With that Governor Jindal, he cuts too much. He cuts the government. There's never enough money for a government. And you know what I tell them? That's exactly right. I am guilty as charged. Here's a little secret the left doesn't understand. We don't measure prosperity by how the government is doing. We measure prosperity by how people in the real world are doing. Now, you're going to have Republican candidates for president come and promise you they're going to fight ISIS, they'll protect the unborn, and they'll get rid of Obamacare. And that's great, but we don't want them to just talk about doing those things. We want them to actually do those things. And you know, one of the things we need done right now in our country, we need somebody who's going to stand up for us, fight for us, and restore our First Amendment religious liberty rights right here in the United States. Now, we could spend all night just talking about the Supreme Court. I don't know about you, I was so disappointed last week when first our court decides that words don't have meaning. That's what Scalia said. I mean, there's no better way to describe what they did in the Obamacare case. And then they followed up by trying to redefine marriage, and in that case, Robert says this has nothing to do with the Constitution. So let's recap. United States Supreme Court can't be bothered to read a dictionary or the Constitution. Instead, they become just a public opinion polling entity. You know, I said I was in Iowa, the rulings came out, the reporter caught up to me as soon as I came out, and I said, well, why don't we just save some money and get rid of the court if that's all they're going to do? And the reality is this. Let's talk about that marriage ruling. Look, no earthly court can change my understanding of marriage. It was instituted by God as being between a man and a woman. And the reality is this. I believe, and I still believe, that the federal government needs to restore our 10th Amendment rights that the courts have now tried to take away. I also think they need to define marriage as between a man and a woman. But make no mistake about it. This fight is about marriage, but it's even bigger than marriage. The left is now coming after our First Amendment rights. Remember when Hillary Clinton said those of us that are pro-life need to have our religious beliefs changed? Well, I'm here to tell you, my religious beliefs are not between me and Hillary Clinton. They're between me and God Almighty, and I'm not changing them for her. We signed a Religious Freedom Restoration Act in Louisiana. We signed an executive order in Louisiana. My first term, my second term, just a couple of months ago, we signed an executive order called the Marriage and Conscience Act, saying the state of Louisiana, the state government, will not discriminate against individuals, businesses, and others for having a traditional belief in marriage as being between a man and a woman. On Monday, I was sued by the ACLU. Now, apparently the ACLU believes, on their own website, they believe in religious liberty as a fundamental right. Apparently, except for when it applies to Christians. They've used Louisiana's own Religious Freedom Restoration Act to defend religious minorities. And I'm glad they did. But now that it's Christian business owners facing discrimination, now that it's Christian individuals who are having to choose to whether they can follow their conscience or whether they'll be able to stay in business. Their own government threatening them with tens and thousands of dollars in fines. Now the ACLU is showing their hypocrisy. Look, the easiest thing for any politician to do is to, quote, evolve with the times. Let's be honest, we all know what happened. President Obama, Secretary Clinton, they looked at the opinion polls and they changed their positions. In the South, we have a saying, when a politician sees a mob marching on City Hall, they get in front of it and they call it a parade. That's exactly what the President and Secretary Clinton are doing. Well, I'm here to tell you, my views are not evolving. When it comes to marriage, my views are not evolving. And I'm also here to tell you, and I'll say it slowly so even Hillary Clinton can understand this. The United States of America did not create religious liberty. Religious liberty created the United States of America. I want to share with you a secret, though, that Republicans in D.C. won't tell you. The establishment, they were happy with last week's ruling. Why do I say that? Well, they view marriage and all these issues as a distraction. They don't want to talk about that. Religious liberty, they don't want to talk about that. On Obamacare, they don't want to do the hard work of coming up with a replacement. You heard Jill say, I'm the only candidate with a detailed plan on how do you repeal and replace Obamacare. I've got a novel idea. You know, when Jeb Bush says that we should be willing to lose the primary in order to win the general, let me translate that for you. What he's really saying is, why don't you try to get the left and the media to like you? Why don't you hide your conservative principles? Why don't you water them down? I've got a radical idea. I've got a different idea. What if instead, just for once, just as a novelty, what if we actually embraced our principles? What if we actually ran as conservatives? What if we actually said the things you're not supposed to say in Washington, D.C.? Because I tell you, you go to D.C. and you tell them you want to balance the budget. You tell them you want to reduce the size of the federal government, not slow down the growth rate. You tell them you want to hunt down and kill radical Islamic terrorists and actually call them radical Islamic terrorists. You tell them you want to repeal all of Obamacare, not just parts of it. You tell them you want to rein in the EPA and get rid of Common Core. The Democrats and the Republicans tell you, oh, that's just foolish talk. You can't do that. Well, I'm here to tell you, folks, if we don't do it, we are done. If we don't do it, the Republican Party might as well fold up its tents and go home. We don't need to be a cheaper Democratic Party. This country doesn't need two liberal parties. I'm here to tell you the hour is late. I still believe our best days are ahead of us. But I don't think we've got much time left. I think we've got to rescue our country for the sake of our children and grandchildren. When I'm your president, we'll do four things. Number one, we will repeal all of Obamacare and replace it with a free market plan that empowers consumers and their doctors. Secondly, we're going to secure the border. We're not going to talk about it. We're not doing a comprehensive plan. We're not giving amnesty. We're going to secure the border. We're going to get it done. Third, we're going to shrink the size of the federal government so we can grow the private sector economy, because we understand that is the real success in America. And fourth and finally, we are going to rebuild our nation's defenses. We're going to show the world that peace through strength works. As your commander-in-chief, I'll make sure that our friends trust us, our enemies fear and respect us. Yes, we will stand with Israel, and no, we will not allow Iran to become a nuclear power. I want to close with this. I could talk to you all night, but I want to leave plenty of time for your questions, and then after that, leave time to visit with you as well. I want to close with this. We're asking people to join a cause, even more than we're asking them to join a campaign. What do I mean by that? You know, as a kid, my dad would tell me that Americans could do anything. And I believed him when he said that. I believed him then, and I believe him now. And I think you believe that as well. I know we need our belief restored. We need our faith restored. These last several years have been tough for our country, for conservatives. But I think our 40th president was right when he described America as that shining city on a hill. But I think he was also right when he warned us that every generation must renew for itself these principles of freedom. Previous generations have spilt great blood and treasure to give us this incredible inheritance. I don't want to be the last generation that grows up in the greatest country in the world. This election is not about you and me. This election is about our children and grandchildren. One day they will look back at this moment in history and say one of two things. They'll either thank us for having the courage to stand up and rescue our country, or they're going to have to learn about America by the history books, because the country that we will know will no longer be there. Look, if you're looking for a candidate to manage our gradual descent into mediocrity, I'm not your candidate. But if you're looking for somebody who's willing to make a big change in D.C., we're asking to join this cause. We're asking to believe again. Let's restore the American dream. Let's rescue this country from socialism. God bless y'all, and thank y'all very much for coming out today. Here's a secret little truth. So, President Obama had a Democratic House and Senate for 2 years. He got a stimulus, $1 trillion stimulus, and he got Obamacare done. In 2 years. The Republicans had the White House, the House, and the Senate for 6 years. What did we get done? Well, I'll tell you what, it's even worse than nothing. We got no child left behind. That was with a Republican majority. By the way, that's the bill, that's the authority that Arnie Duncan is using to try to beat states into submission to go into Common Core. So I think it's not enough just to send more Republicans to D.C. I think we need to send the right Republican to the White House when it comes to Congress. You're only going to fix Congress with structural changes. Now, what do I mean by that? You got to have term limits. One of the worst things you've got is you've got a permanent ruling class. I don't just mean term limits like they can't just be in Congress, they can't go and become lobbyists. Now you got these men and women that make 6, 7 figures, they never come home, they never live under the same rules they applied for the rest of us. I think it might be a little different. Remember how upset they were when they had to go under Obamacare? Yeah. Oh, it was a good enough law for us, but they didn't want it for themselves or their staff. For them, that was different. Secondly, I think we need a balanced budget amendment in the Constitution. Third, I think it should take a supermajority vote before they can raise our taxes. Fourth, I don't think they should be able to grow the government faster than the private sector economy, again, without a supermajority vote. Now, fifth, and this is a little more controversial, in Louisiana, we've got a part-time legislature. I want a part-time Congress. The Founding Fathers intended them to be farmers and business people and husbands and wives who left their families, left their jobs, served the country, and then came back. But I'd also add something else. You know, in Louisiana, we pay them a per diem. We don't pay them an annual salary to be in the legislature. Per diem. I'd like to pay Congress a per diem, but I want to pay them for every day they stay out of D.C. rather than every day they come to D.C. The second part of the answer to your question is I think Reagan showed us that even with a Democratic majority, he went around the Congress. He went to the people. I want to be elected with a mandate from the people of this country to go to Congress and say, I wasn't elected to tinker. And I'm serious. And I will stare them down. I had a Democratic majority my first term. And we got school choice done. We cut income tax. We did other things. Because my first year, I vetoed more than many previous governors put together. They tested me that first year, and then they realized we were serious. We need a president who's want to stand up to Republicans and the Democrats in Congress and say, we can't afford business as usual. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I think being commander-in-chief is probably the toughest job, or one of the toughest jobs in our president. So, Governor Jindal, did you ever serve in the service? And if not, why not?
I did not. And look, I have tremendous respect for those men and women that have served us in uniform. They run towards danger, not away from it, so that we can be safe. I haven't served in the military. Let me share with you what I think should guide our commander-in-chief when it comes to foreign policy or deploying our troops. I want to shrink the size of the government. But the reality is there are areas I think we need to invest more. I think we need to be investing more in our military. We've got a president right now who's hollowing out our military. I think we're going to have fewer troops, fewer planes, older ships, and equipment than we've had in decades, at a time that China and others are investing in their military. I also think we've got a commander-in-chief who sends our men and women into harm's way without giving them the support and the strategy they need to be successful.
Right.
I can tell you, as your commander-in-chief, I'm not putting political handcuffs on the military. If I deploy our men and women in harm's way, I'm going to make sure that we do everything possible to make sure that they win. I never want our military in a fair fight. I want them to dominate any potential conflict they're in.
First of all, I want to welcome you to Iowa.
Thank you.
What is your position on the renewable fuel standard?
So a couple of things. One, when I was in Congress, I did vote for the ethanol, the renewable fuel standard in 2005. I've come out with a detailed energy plan, and I've said over time, I want to see the RFS, I want to see the renewable fuel standard phased out. And not just about the RFS. I want to see all of the carve-outs, both, look, I come from an oil and gas state. Now we also have a lot of ethanol as well. We got a lot of corn in Louisiana as well. I want to see the government picking winners and losers. I think biofuels are a very important part of our energy mix. I think it's very good for our economy. I think it's done many positive things in diversifying our energy mix. But in the same way, I don't like it when the left picks Solyndra or other favorite types of energy. I don't want us to do it either. Now, I say phase out over time because I don't want individuals or companies to all of a sudden face a loss because they made investments based on promises from the government. I think that it's only fair that we give them time to recover their investments. I also think that everybody needs to come to the table. I don't think you can just say, we're only taking away RFS, but we're not taking away the other subsidies and other favorable treatments for other fuels. At the end of the day, I don't want government to pick winners and losers. I think that if we say that about Solyndra, if we say that about the left's favorite energy sources, we've got to say it about all energy sources. I think one of the things this president has done is he has stood in the way of energy being affordable and available. I think with available energy, we can have manufacturing jobs come back to America. And we're seeing it in Louisiana. We're seeing the steel industry, the fertilizer industry, and other industries come back to our state as well. So I'm a supporter. I initially voted for ethanol because I wanted to give it time for it to get established, get on its feet. I want to see it be able to compete on a level playing field. But over time, I want government out of the business of picking winners and losers on all sides. Yes, sir.
Could you give us your Christian testimony?
Sure. I'll be happy to. So, I'd love to tell you I had a sudden epiphany like St. Paul. For me, I did, but it was 7 years in the making. And so there's hope for anybody. I'll give you an abridged version. I'm more than happy to come back and give you my full testimony. I love sharing with folks what the Lord did in my life. I was born and raised to believe in God. But when I used to pray to God, it was like I was talking to Santa Claus. And what I mean by that, every night I'd say my prayers would be, Dear God, I'll be good if you just give me what I want. And every morning I'd break my promise. And my faith would have stayed that way if it hadn't been for my best friend. We were kids. We were on our school bus going to school. He stopped at my seat and he said the strangest thing he'd ever said to me. He said, Bobby, I'm going to miss you, and I feel sorry for you. I said, what are you talking about? That sounds like a strange, like, I'm right here. What do you mean you feel sorry for me? He said, I'm going to miss you, and I feel sorry for you because when I go to heaven, I'm going to miss you when you're not there. And he kept walking. I thought he was crazy. He had been to a summer Bible study camp, and his pastor had taught him the importance of sharing his faith. Now, I don't want you to go home and tell your neighbors, Governor Jindal came to see us. I want to tell you good people, we're going to miss you. I mean, because who talks like that to people? I thought he was crazy, but he planted a seed of the gospel. Several months later, he gave me a Christmas gift that changed my life. We were exchanging presents, and he gave me my gift, and I opened it. It's my best friend. I thought it'd be something good, something expensive. My best friend gave me my very first copy of the Bible. Well, I was so disappointed. I remember thinking, who buys somebody a Bible? If you want a Bible, you can get one for free in any hotel room in America. Why would you spend good money on one of these things? But he was smart, because on the front page in gold letters it said Bobby Jindal. Well, I can't return it now. It's got my name on it. I mean, can you imagine re-gifting that to somebody? I mean, how do you give somebody a Bible without a cover on it? They're going to be suspicious. So I didn't even read it. I threw it in my closet. I didn't even look at it. God used that experience to plant a seed. Well, several months, a couple of years later, my grandfather dies. Now, this was a man I loved and somebody I looked up to. This was the man I wanted to be when I grew up. He had a stroke. He died suddenly. He wasn't that old. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye. And you know that happens. I don't know about you, but I was so mad at the time I wasted when he was still alive. I remember thinking I'd give anything to have 5 more minutes with him. I couldn't remember the last thing I'd said to him. Couldn't even remember if I actually told him how much I loved him. I began to wonder if I'd see him again. I wondered if heaven existed. I wondered if that was it. I wondered if heaven existed, how'd you get into heaven? Does it take $1 million? Do you have to be good all the time? How do you impress God? So I started reading that Bible out of desperation. This would be a great testimony if God just hit me with a light or something, but I didn't understand what I was reading. But he still used that experience to plant the seed. About that time, I was praying to God, but I was still praying, God, I was still making deals. I said, if you will give me 2 prayers, I'll never ask you for anything else. Number 1, I want to know if you exist. Number 2, if you exist, I want to know how to worship you. About that time, a pastor told a friend of mine, I don't think Bobby's ever going to become a Christian. He is so stubborn. He's got so many questions. You know, I bet you there's somebody in your life that has frustrated you that way. Maybe a family member or a neighbor or somebody at work, maybe even a child. And maybe you brought them to church, shared scripture with them, prayed with them, and you just look at their lifestyles, and you look at them and go, this is impossible. But you know, we worship an all-powerful God. He can use whatever's in our lives to bring us back closer to him. So, to get my attention, he used what was most important to me. I was a teenage high school boy. He used a teenage high school girl to get my attention. Kind of makes sense. There was a girl in my high school I liked from afar, never got a chance to meet with her. My friends were tired of hearing about it. They said, if you like her so much, tell her. Stop telling us. Pretty good advice. Well, long story short, we started talking after school one day at a school event. We had this great meeting. I was just amazed. This pretty girl, and she liked me, and I liked her, and it was going great. So I screwed it up. I asked her, what do you want to be when you grow up? My little boys, they want to play baseball, they want to play football. Kids, things kids normally dream about. This little girl told me something I'd never heard before. She said, when I grow up, I want to become a United States Supreme Court Justice. Who in the world wants to be that? I mean, I'm saying, what normal kid is growing, thinking one day, I get one to be a football player or a policeman or a fire, but who wants to be a Supreme Court Justice? So I asked her, why would you want to do that? And I still remember her answer. She said, because when I grow up, I want to help save innocent human lives right here in America. I'm right thinking, how did I get on such a serious topic? I just want to talk to a pretty girl. Where did this come from? But I remember there was something in her life missing in mine. And I would later realize it was the Holy Spirit. About that time, my best friend, the final point was my best friend invited me to come listen to him sing in a church musical at chapel on the campus, on the LSU campus. Non-denominational church started by a follower of Billy Graham. Billy Graham had preached a crusade in the early 70s, and this guy just felt called to plant this church. Who would have known at the age of 16 I would be there watching this musical. In the middle of it, they stopped. Played a little black and white film, nothing fancy. Camera was probably shaking, no famous actors in this thing. For some reason, God hit me harder in that moment than I've ever been hit before. And I don't know why he chose that moment. I don't know why he chose that film. People have asked me about the years, I don't know. But when I saw the actor playing Jesus being crucified on the cross, he just did it. If that's really the Son of God, and he's dying there up on the cross because of me. Oh, I don't mean he died for all of humanity or billions of people. That's too easy. It was very personal. He's dying because of my sins. Because of Bobby Jindal, what I have done, what I have failed to do. How arrogant for me to do anything but get on my knees and worship him. Youth pastor came out and said, if you've not accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior, we want you to fill out a card. We want to get to know you better. So I did. And I started meeting with that youth pastor every month and then every week and every day. We started praying together. We read the gospel. We read the scriptures together. And it's like the gospels were written just for me. The words jumped off the page. It was like Jesus was talking to me from 2,000 years ago directly. Many years later, I was in a debate, my very last debate, my first election. They asked me, what was the single most important moment in your life? You have 30 seconds to answer. You're on live TV. There's no call of friends. You can't, no lifelines, none of that. Yeah, that's right. There's none of that. He's got to answer. I didn't even think, look, at that time, I was married. I had one child. We didn't have the other two yet. Could have talked about my wedding day. Could have talked about the birth of our little girl, my daughter. I didn't even think, I just said, I blurted out the truth. I just said, look, the most important moment of my life is the moment that I found Jesus Christ. I should have probably corrected it. It was actually the moment he found me. I mean, think about it. It's not like he was the one that was lost. I'm the one that was lost. Some people like that answer. Some people didn't like that answer. I said it was the truth. And the reason I'm glad to be able to share that with you, one thing I hope you would take away from my testimony is, and all of us have our own testimonies, is the encouragement to plant those seeds of the gospel. It's easy to get discouraged. But we're not called to reap. Sometimes we're called to plant those seeds. We're not always called to reap. And we're not called to decide whether the ground is rocky or fertile. There are people that planted seeds of the gospel in my life throughout the years that had no idea the impact they had. I'm no theologian or pastor, but somebody described to me that when we get to heaven, we will be greeted by and see all the people whose lives we've impacted. And there'll be people we wouldn't even recognize on this earth, or we wouldn't even remember. I don't know if that's true or not. It's a pretty picture, and I hope it's true. But I do think whatever our circumstances, we're all called to plant those seeds. There are people in our lives who we're the only ones we can reach. And I wouldn't be here today if there hadn't been a boy brave enough to give me a Bible and I didn't want it. Or a little girl brave enough to tell me about her dream to be on the court, or many other people that took the time to plant those seeds in my life. Yes, sir.
Governor, what would you do about government? In my opinion, it's out of control. I don't care if they have a union. If they don't want to do their job, they don't do it. I can tell you stories about the VA. I can tell you other stories about the Labor Department and everything, and they just say you can't do anything about it. We don't want to do our job. We're just going to collect a paycheck and screw you. What are you going to do about that?
So I told you in our state we got 30,000 fewer bureaucrats working for state government than the day I took office, the smallest in decades. Here's the problem in the federal government. We get a Republican president. They send they send these secretaries, these principals of these departments, thinking they're going to go out there and shrink the government and represent the president's policies. Instead, too often they go native. They come back to the White House, they start lobbying for more money, more resources for their departments, instead of trying to shrink them. When was the last time a cabinet secretary showed up and said, I've got too much money, I don't need all this money, I got too many people, I got too much authority? There's an old saying in the business world, if you buy an $800 hammer, everything looks like a nail. Once you get appointed secretary, you want more power. You want every one of them is fighting to expand their agencies. I think fundamentally, it's not just putting the right cabinet secretaries. It's shrinking the power, the scope of these bureaucracies, these agencies. And I'll give you 3 examples. So the IRS. So they go after conservative groups for their political beliefs. We need to get rid of the lowest learners and the others, but that's not enough. As long as they've got the discretion to interpret the tax code they want, the way they want, we're going to continue to have abuses. And that's why you need a lower, flatter tax code without all those carve-outs. The Federal Department of Education. So if you want your own tax dollars back, if you want a waiver from No Child Left Behind's requirements, you've got to do whatever Arnie Duncan tells you. Maybe it's Common Core today, and who knows what it's going to be tomorrow. Today, Common Core is an ELA and math. And that's bad enough. What happens if tomorrow the Federal Department of Education decides they want to rewrite American history? Can you imagine how they would teach it? All about victimhood. It wouldn't be about American exceptionalism. And so that's why in Louisiana we have the dollars following the child, not the child following the dollars. We trust parents, not bureaucrats. Federal Department of Education spends billions of dollars on teacher quality programs that don't do anything to improve teacher quality or student outcomes. Why not get rid of those programs? Give those dollars back to the states or stop that spending altogether. The EPA. The EPA wants to regulate the water in your backyard. They want to regulate the CO2, the ozone. We got to shrink their size, their authority. What if we said every regulation that costs over $100 million has to go for an up or down vote to Congress? So they can't hide. What if we said that every regulation has to have a third-party independent analysis of the cost and the impact? Right now, so the Supreme Court, they actually struck down one of these EPA rules because they could say, yeah, we're going to do a regulation that will cost billions of dollars, even if we don't have to show that there's any benefit for cost. We don't have to weigh the two. And then when we do, we're going to rig the scale. We're going to come up and tell you how much we think it helps people. Those are some of the things, but look, if somebody just tells you, I'm going to send the right person to run an agency, that doesn't work. You got to fundamentally shrink those agencies so you got fewer employees. And then, yes, you got to hold those remaining employees accountable. One of the phrases I hate is it's good enough for government work. Well, that's nonsense. The people that we hire with our tax dollars, they work for us. We should demand excellence the same way that you would when you spend your